So I'm going to be talking about adaptive citizen science. Now that might sound a little bit technical, but hopefully I'll be able to talk you through and tell you a bit about what this is, what I'm meaning by this. The whole idea of spatially targeted recording. So let's go on. Within the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, I work within the Biological Record Centre. That's the national focus for recording of a wide range of different wildlife, basically everything apart from birds, which is covered by the British Trust for Ornithology, and not marine, which is covered by another organisation. We've been going for nearly 60 years. I think it's coming up in a few months' time. It'll be our 60th birthday. And we produced this guide from our 50th anniversary, which you can access via the BRC website. And so we support national organisations which do recording across a wide range of different taxa. It's about 85 different taxonomic recording schemes and societies that we support. And most of them, in most cases, will be working in conjunction with the local environmental record centres as well. So that's really good news. You're both, by sending in records via appropriate routes, you can be both contributing to this, this national knowledge on particular species and species groups, and also contributing to that local knowledge as well, and the local use of the data by the local environmental record centres like Record. Within the Biological Records Centre, there's broadly two sorts of types of citizen science or volunteer recording that we support. One is the structured recording schemes. So in particular, we work in partnership with others to deliver and bring about the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme, National Plant Monitoring Scheme, and the Pollinator Monitoring Scheme. And what that leads to is the production of indicators. So you can see at the bottom there, indicators for specialist versus generalist butterflies and how that has changed over time. So that feeds directly into government policy and the way in which government evaluates its environmental record. And the other thing that we support is the opportunistic recording. And I say opportunistic. Clearly, people will be collecting records in ways that make sense to them, and it might be in quite a structured way, but ultimately it all goes into a big database that people aren't following specific protocols, so we call it opportunistic. And in particular, we support iRecord, and that it's probably 100,000 recorders annually, 20 million records annually submitted. I think these are probably even a year out of date, these numbers. So the number increases and increases every single year. And within tools like iRecord, we've implemented things like AI, so that can, if you've got organisms where you can photograph the organism, and it's possible to identify it from a photograph, which obviously is not the case with a whole load of smaller flies and various things like this. But where that's possible, the AI can provide a support for you as a recorder, which might be able to augment or allow you to have confidence in the identification that you're submitting. So we're not excluding humans from, or people from this verification, but very much using new technologies increasingly about how we can best support recorders. I'll say a bit more about that as I go through. We do know that in the UK and globally, actually, volunteer collected biodiversity data is incredibly valuable. This crucial part of our environmental monitoring in the UK, across Europe and across the world as well. And it complements the data that comes from professionals, which might be consultants in the UK, it might be academic research teams in Brazil or Borneo or wherever you might be. And also what we've got is we've got in-field sensors, and we've got satellite sensing as well, can also include drones. So we've got a wide range of these different ways of sensing the environment. But volunteers going out there collecting records is a wonderful part of this. Why is volunteer collected biodiversity data so valuable? Well, one of the things is that it benefits the science, and I talked about the headline indicators that the government and DEFRA in particular use from volunteer collected data. And a lot of records and analysis goes into things like the state of nature, which is a national report which comes out every few years. And we're able to report on, I think it's trends in about 2,000 individual species now. So a remarkable number of species. We're able to give this updated reporting as to how these species are doing. The other thing, thinking about it from the other side, is that volunteer collected biodiversity data benefits people. And I led a study which was published last year in the journal People and Nature, which is open access so that anyone can access it. And we showed that people, volunteers getting involved in nature-based citizen science demonstrably benefits people's nature connectedness and well-being. So I'm sure, like you, like me, you know that going out, recording nature and spending time in nature is good for you. Well, I proved the obvious within this particular study here, to really be able to have that scientific evidence that, yes, you know what, spending time in nature, and in particular, recording nature, is demonstrably good for you. And it can also benefit action for nature. Now, a study which was led, well, it was taken part by a colleague of mine called Miranda Bain and we did this work about thinking about how we can support pollinator monitoring, in particular at a local scale. And we went out and we did a whole load of surveys of different people and different stakeholders, and they fed back as to why they felt it was important, why they felt pollinator monitoring was important. So one of the things was that people were saying it's the value of the data is really good. We can prove, we can understand, we can influence, we can make things better with the data. And this is species data, in this case on pollinators. The second thing is that it's those benefits to people. Like I just said, it benefits individuals, but this particular project also said, well, it involves the whole community. And so you've got the educational impact, and you've got all these different benefits where people will get those benefits. And a third stakeholder here with this quote said it was really valuable for supporting action. People love a story, and if people can get engaged in the narrative, they will start to take action. So really wonderful stuff. Within that particular project, it led to us producing this particular guide, and you can download it. If you do have a smartphone, you can scan the QR code, look back at the recording in the future and scan it if you want. And it was a really well-received guide talking about the richness of the different ways in which people can support pollinator monitoring at a local level. And one of the things was that we had the starters guide to citizen science and pollinator monitoring. And in particular, what we did was we talked to people through and we said, well, actually, if at a local scale you want to get involved in monitoring, then actually have a think, is citizen science or volunteer engagement the right tool for you, the right approach? Can you actually sustain it longer term? Can you adopt the best practice in methodologies and survey designs when you actually roll this out? And importantly, can you link up with national schemes and with national networks like the local environmental records centres in order to get this national benefit as well as local relevance? And how do you feed back to participants? So thinking more generally then about a lot of this citizen science that people can get involved in and the recording, the biological recording, many projects allow people to take part wherever they choose. And I referred to those earlier. So there are some projects which don't, and they ask you to go to set locations. But whether you're using a tool like iRecord, the iRecord app, taking part in the big butterfly count, doing a fit count, which is one of the pollinator survey approaches, you can take part whenever, oh, sorry, not necessarily whenever, you can take part wherever you want. Now, this clearly leads to spatial unevenness. And so you can see this distorted map, which was a visual that my colleague Tom August created. And it's distorted with counties being bigger if they've got more records and being shrunk down if they've got fewer records. And you can see that England in particular, and maybe in particular southeastern England, is distorted. It's much bigger, which is an indication that we get many more records from those counties than, for example, Scotland or the Midlands of Wales. And that's not only the case at a national level, but it's also the case at a local level. So if you look at that little diagram there, that's from towns just outside of London. And you can see that there's a clustering of where these, in this case, butterfly records have come from. People seem to be not recording right in the centre of the towns, and they're not recording widely in the countryside, but they're doing lots of recording. You can see trails along rivers there. You can see out in the suburbs, maybe the nicer parks and gardens and places like that. So there's this spatial unevenness, and that's an indication of where people want to go recording quite often at that small spatial scale. And that's fine, that's good, because all these records are really valuable. However, when we think about the need for data, we've got this good information on large-scale national trends, and I showed those diagrams of the butterfly trends on the previous slide. We've also got really great information in many cases for records at site levels. So in particular, nature reserves and things like that. We've got these records and we're able to use them to say something about, well, actually, there's a really special species of, I don't know, it might be an orchid or it might be a snail or something like that. And we can manage this reserve to care for this particular species, and we can monitor it over time. And that's great. But there's a whole load of people who've been saying, actually, what we really need is, or what we'd love, is in order to make decisions at that regional level, we'd love to have comprehensive fine-scale maps of natural capital. Now, that's a technical term, bit of a buzzword, bit of jargon, if you like. But actually, that's related to biodiversity, or at least a large part of that is related to the species that occur there. So these sorts of data users, which might be people involved in local nature recovery strategies at the county level, or it might be people involved in regional planning. So folks like those in Yorkshire or Manchester are thinking about these sorts of regional decision making. And they're saying, we've got data on dots on maps as to where we've got records, but we don't know what's happening in the places where we haven't got dots on maps. If we could have something that was more modelled from the data, then that would be really helpful. We also spoke with recorders and said, well, I'm happy to go pottering around in my garden making records. I can go to my local nature reserve, but are those the places where we really need the records? So recorders were saying it would be great to have tools to help guide their recording. Let's put it another way. All records are valuable, well, more or less, that's maybe not strictly true, but most records, at least, those ones that are correct, are really valuable. So keep collecting those records of species, submitting them in the ways that you do, making sure that the records are used. However, I would argue that we don't simply need more records, but what we need is more informative records. So how do you choose where to record? Because the issue is that when we're looking at fine scale maps and distributions and things like that, even if you look at the hectare scale, which is 100 by 100 meters, that's still quite large when it comes to making decisions and things like this. But there's 25 million hectares in the UK. We're not going to get records from all of those 25 million squares. So how on earth do you as a recorder, me as a recorder, make those sorts of decisions? Well, I'm going to talk briefly about this particular project, the Targeting Revisits map, and then I'll go on to talk more about the Decide project in just a moment. And so within Biological Records Centre, we've created these Targeting Revisits maps for a few range of species. So you can see they're grasshoppers and bush crickets, crane flies, ground beetles, soldier flies, and ladybirds. And these are maps that are available that provide a really simple piece of information about the species that have been recorded in that taxa. And we're simply asking, can you make the pink squares green? And the thing is that the pink squares are places where we've got records of one or more species within that taxonomic group from 1 year in the past. And when we go on to do this analysis and start looking at trends in distribution and things like that, we can't use the data where we've only got data from 1 year in the past. So what that means is if you go back, if there's been grasshoppers recorded, you can see in that example there, grasshoppers recorded, someone went there twice in 2002 and they recorded 11 species of grasshopper, ground beetle in that case. They recorded 11 species. If I go back there, run some pitfall traps, record ground beetles, now suddenly both those years worth of data can go into the data set, which is then used for trend analysis. So that's wonderful. I can turn a pink square green by, in that case, going and recording the ground beetles in that place. So that's really super. And so we've run these for a few years now, and we've asked people what they thought about it. And people said, well, actually, that sort of level of information is very likely to influence them in terms of their recording. How much will it influence people's recording? And most people said, well, I'm not going to spend all of my time just chasing those pink squares, but some of my time, you know what? Yeah, if it's really clear that the data is going to be useful, I'm happy to go out and go recording in those pink squares. So we then asked people, well, actually, given those maps, what are the places that are going to really inspire you? And people were like, yep, really motivated to record in those pink squares. I'm happy to keep recording in those well recorded, but I'm not going to go out specifically to record in what we called in this map well recorded squares. But they also said, well, I'm very motivated to, or somewhat motivated to record in the gaps, in the places where we haven't had data. And we've seen this with some people, that they've actually been really motivated to go, hang on a minute, there are more gaps here than I was expecting in my local area. I can start going out, getting records in these places, or maybe going back through my notebooks and submitting the records online. And the great thing about this particular tool is that because it was updated in real time via the data that was submitted in iRecord, then people could come back the following day and go, hurrah, I can see this square that was pink has now turned green. And it was really interesting because we were asking people a bit more about their motivations. And people were saying, well, actually, yeah, I think it's going to change my behavior. And so either in a very personal sense, so people were saying, I will visit new sites or things like that, or in a general sense, saying, well, someone could use this information. But I found it really interesting because there were quite a few people who also said, actually, it's really nice to have this really clear information on species and sites. It informs me about what's going on. And actually, a substantial minority of people openly said, it's great to see my data are useful. And that sense of reassurance that the data that they're submitting wasn't simply going into a black hole or hopefully to be used by someone at some point in the future. But it gave that real sense of reassurance that what they were contributing to was going to be used and useful. So that's great. That's quite a simple way of looking at that. But nonetheless, I think really useful and really successful. I'm now going to go on and talk about the Decide project, which in some senses was doing a similar sort of thing, but had a larger budget, which was great. And it allowed us, really excitingly, to draw on a really wide range of different expertise. So we had ecologists involved in the project, people interested in citizen science as an approach, people who were statisticians and data scientists. We had social scientists and those with expertise in remote sensing. We had computer scientists and those people whose actual area of expertise is visual data science and things like that. So really being able to apply that academic knowledge about how we communicate things visually. I think as ecologists, we probably don't do a bad job of doing that, but it's really insightful to get the expertise of people like Greg and Chatay to be able to bring their expertise, and we could draw on that, which was super. So the principle of the design project was we were looking at data on butterflies and moths, and we took records, so over 100,000 records from, 18 million records from 100,000 observers over the past 20 years. And we took all of this data and we were able to do some modeling. I'll say a little bit more about that in just a moment. And so we ended up with distribution models for over 800 species of butterfly and moth. So the thing about that is that these were predictions, so they were uncertain, but we were able to quantify this uncertainty. So these predictions of where we thought these species would occur based on the data that we've already collected. But there was a final missing link within the Decide project, which made it really special. And that was, I've used some buzzwords there. You can talk about this as a digital twin, which sounds pretty fancy, doesn't it? But you can explain it in much simpler language as well. This idea of adaptive sampling. So we're asking people to adapt their behavior, or inviting people actually to adapt their behavior, to adapt the places where they go recording based on this information that they can spatially target. So you can have some sort of information which allows you to, if you want to say, oh, I'm going to record over there rather than over here. So let's go on a little bit more about that. With the social scientists involved in this project, it was really great because we were able to think in detail about the motivations for people to get involved in recording. And this might be something that as you look at this, you can reflect on and go, yeah, I can really see that. So people were saying, I want to make my recording count, which suggests that they might be willing to record in a slightly different way, at least some of the time, if they were convinced that it would count even more. People were talking about this question of trust. So we were saying, oh, look, what information do you need to be convinced that what we're telling you is true? And people were saying, actually, you folk at the Biological Records Centre, by and large, we trust you. We're willing to get the information from you. You don't need to sort of convince us and go head over heels to try and do all of this convincing. Instead, just tell us what you need and we'll consider it. But also people said, well, look, some of the reasons why we get involved in this recording is it's because of this connection to nature. It's because actually this sense of place. You might ask me to go to that place that I think is fairly boring. For me, it's really important to keep walking around the same nature reserve or the local patch and do that on a regular basis and see the seasons change. And all of those sorts of things are really important to me. Maybe that's going to be the bulk of most people's recording most of the time. And that's fine. But we wanted to, given all this information, it seemed really rich that we could think about how we could communicate in a persuasive way. So not manipulative, but just give information that was going to be effective. And so as we were designing this and thinking about it, we were thinking, okay, so we need to make this information relevant. We need to make it accessible. We need to make it actionable so people can see, aha, I can do something on the basis of this. And overall, we wanted to make it appealing. You can be the judge as to whether we succeeded in that or not. And this sort of roadmap of co-design just briefly sort of walks through some of the ways in which we designed this particular computer tool that I'll talk about in just a moment. And we had this really wide range of consultation and development, and we basically developed things and iterated things from going from prototype to prototype and iterating it really rapidly, so that people who were involved in this process could give feedback, and then very quickly, within a week or so, they could see the impact of the feedback that they had given. This required quite an agile way of doing this. It required us to work very closely with the developers, the computer developers, but it was really exciting in terms of the way in which we were able to do this. So I promised I'd say a little bit more about the modelling. You'll be thankful, well, maybe you'll be thankful that I'm not going to go into the detail of the statistics, but just to say that we were able to take data from these 33 environmental layers and combine them with some sort of the citizen science data, so the data on records of a particular species of butterfly or moth. And we could account for the fact of where people were going to make these records as to whether they saw butterflies or not. And then we combine this together in, you can see some acronyms there for statistical models that we used. And ultimately, we were able to come up with a predicted distribution, but that predicted distribution also had uncertainty. So the thing is that spatially, we could say, well, look, we're pretty certain that this species is likely to occur or not likely to occur in this particular location. But in other locations, we just were much more uncertain. Now, that implies if somebody goes to that place and starts recording there, and maybe they see the butterfly or they don't see the butterfly, well, actually, that information is really valuable for updating our models. So if we can direct people to go to those places, that would be super. So what we did was that we created these layers across the landscape to identify these priorities for recording. And so we asked where the models of species distribution were least confident, this idea of the uncertainty. But then what we did is we subtracted from that where observations have already been made. So even if we might be quite uncertain, if this is a place where people have made records in the past, particularly in the recent past, chances are they may well make records from there again. So we don't need to specifically ask people to go to those locations. We'd like to ask people or invite people to go to the other locations, the ones that they haven't visited, but where there's uncertainty. And that got to this layer shown there, where the more yellow places indicate the places that we'd really like to target the recording. And so I've promised, haven't I, that I would talk about the tool that we developed. And so we produced this, and you can visit it now. And so that's the side tool. So the question was, the pitch was, if you like, do you want to discover new places to record wildlife? So you can explore this decide tool, and it shows those places which have a high priority for recording based on the criteria that I just explained. So you can then choose a location that you'd like to visit and then go there. Record the species that you see using existing apps or websites. If people recorded using iRecord, then these tools would be updated in real time. If they recorded using other tools or other databases or websites, then we would be able to integrate the data at a slightly later date. And so on this, you can look at a particular circle located around a point of your interest. And so I realize that this thing at the top might be in the way. I'll just move that down the bottom for now. And so the colours there on this particular layer show the recording priorities, with the more yellow being the highest priority for recording. And you can also click a button and get specific suggestions. And so these are pins. You can click on one of the pins or any other place, and you can automatically generate some text explaining why that's a high priority for recording. So it might be because model uncertainty is really high. It might be because the known recording activity is low. And it tells you a bit about what you might expect there, how many species of butterfly that you might expect, and whether we know anything about the accessibility of the location or its habitat or things like that. So hopefully what we've developed is a really rich tool that allows people to explore the data and make good decisions about where to go recording. And what we found over the first year of the development of this, we had nearly 2,000 users. We have many of them using the tool multiple times, and 4 minutes per interaction is actually a fair bit of time that people were exploring on average. It was on average 4 minutes, exploring the tool, trying to understand and think about where they would like to record. We got really positive feedback from users, and I'll go on to talk about the My Decide emails in just a moment. But one of the big questions is, it's like, okay, you might say, Michael, that's all very well, that's great. You've got these models, you've asked us to go recording in these places because you think it's going to make a difference to the models. The question is, does it actually make a difference to the models? And so what we did is that we did a completely different thing, in that we created our own virtual world, or our own virtual UK, and we created virtual species, we created virtual recorders going off doing recording, and so we could create this whole virtual world where we were in control of everything, but also we knew exactly where all the butterflies were, using butterflies as a case study. And so we could do all of this, and then we could start saying, aha, so if the recorders go off recording in a particular pattern, how much impact does it have? And there's some detail there. I fear that this bar might be hiding the detail again. I'll try and move that. So there's some detail in the graphs there that you don't need to worry about, but basically to say, if you keep recording as business as usual, whether you record lots more or a little bit more, by and large, you're not massively improving the models. Okay, so that's interesting. If you simply go gap filling, which is pick any place where there haven't been records before and go recording there, and whether you spend 1% of your new recording time going off gap filling, or 50% of your time going off gap filling, by and large, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. The reason is because there's loads and loads of gaps, and you might just be gap filling in a place where actually we've got fairly good predictions from the model. If instead you do it in an intelligent way, such as using the Decide tool, actually it makes really quite a big difference to the models. And to put that a slightly different way, if each one of those people there is a visit, there are 100 visits there. You know what? If our models show that even if just one visit was targeted on the basis of information in the Decide tool, that makes a difference to the species distribution models, which I think is an amazingly powerful story for recorders like you. So you can do most of your recording in just the way that you love recording, going to those nature reserves, going to the local patch, all the rest of it. Do the recording and please submit the records to a place where they're going to get used and shared and things like that. But you know, if every so often you went off and did a recording trip and did it on the basis of some sort of intelligence about, will we particularly need records from there? you can make a difference, which is amazing. Now, some of the models that we used maybe weren't the best models, they weren't the greatest models. One of the really exciting things is being able to use AI to do some of this modeling. And I've just started a collaboration with the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK Centre of Excellence for Artificial Intelligence. And so bringing that into some of these models, I think could be really exciting and should lead to even better models, which leads to even better targeting in the future. Throughout this project, I just thought I'd say a bit about some of the really specific support for recorders that we gave in a couple of other ways. So one of them is, I don't know if any of you are moth recorders, but typically moth recording is done via light traps, obviously not exclusively, but that's a really great way to do that moth recording. And I love recording the moths in my garden and going down in the morning and being able to look and see what I found when I open the trap. But actually, if we could be more portable with our moth recording, that would be great. So what we did is we actually ended up working with Giggle in London and NEYEDC, which is the local record centre in North and East Yorkshire, and gave them a whole load of portable moth traps. These are LED powered moth traps which run off a mobile phone charging pack and can run overnight for that. And we let them go with recorders, and it was really exciting hearing some of the stories that new moth recorders have come back with, talking about the places that they'd been able to go recording because they had the portability of these traps. But we also gave people personalized feedback as well in an experiment basically called My Decide. So we had 850 people sign up for this. And what we did was we focused on giving these people personalized feedback. We gave people weekly data stories about their butterfly recording. And what we did is we created these data stories in different ways to appeal to different motivations. So all of them reflected on the locations that people had gone recording, but some of them were really personalized. So they talked about, this is the recording that you have done. And you can see there are 9 squares, 9 of those yellowish squares, and each one of those is a mini demonstration of one of those 9 data stories. So we had this control one, which was simply saying, we've got the Decide tool, would you like to visit it? But we also gave people other data stories, which was celebrating a great find that they had had over the past couple of weeks, going the extra mile, encouraging people to record new sites, talking about where they or where the community of people had recorded, or saying something about the impact and how the impact of their recording had changed over time, which was informed by the number of records that they had made and how that had gone up over time. And we provided people with different versions of these. So some of these were really talking about, this is what you've done. It might have been in the context of other people. And others were more generic, saying in your location, this is where people have been recording. And what we found in this experiment was, surprise, well, maybe no surprise, recorders really preferred these personalized email updates. They loved to get the messages about the recording that they had done and the difference that it had made. They really liked this story about impact, which we'd actually designed to be quite competitive. Now, I know that a lot of wildlife recorders say, no, I'm not in it for the competition. I'm not trying to beat other people. Actually, when it comes to it, I think secretly, many of us at least love a bit of competition. So when we communicated to people about how they were doing compared to other people, actually, that went down pretty well. But the interesting contrast to that is people also really like data stories about being part of that community effort. So seeing dots on the map, seeing their records, but also the whole community's records, seeing how they could make a difference. So really exciting stuff there. And one of the cool things about this is that this is going to help shape the way in which we in the Biological Records Centre design giving feedback to recorders, in particular through iRecord. So I think this sort of thing becomes really exciting about the ways in which we can do this in a more automated way. So could even be using artificial intelligence to generate bits of text or generate stories or generate these figures, but doing all of this in a way that's open, it's transparent, it's honest about use of engaging with people versus engaging with chatbots or whatever it might be, but doing it in a way that really makes sense for people and honours and allows them to feel valued for the contributions that they've made, as well as all those other benefits that I talked about right at the start, like the joy you get from spending time in nature and that sense of awe of looking at the beauty of a wonderful little organism or all sorts of things like that. Right, this is just about the last thing. Time for something completely different. I will just say that I'm just about to show a 6-minute video, which is to maybe give you a bit of an insight. Have you ever thought about these big data sets and what they might be dreaming? Okay, so what we did as part of this project as well, we had the opportunity to work with some artists. And we talked to them about the Decide project. We talked to them about the tool that we were developing. And we said, look, we're coming at this from a scientist's point of view. We're thinking about the data. We're thinking about the cool statistical models that we can run on supercomputers and all sorts of things like this. But we'd love your insight as an artist as to how you think we can engage with people and what this might be. And so what we ended up with is the dataset stream. And you can see these glowing, flickering caskets, and you'll see these on the video in just a minute. And these were representations of, from the artist's perspective, what the datasets, our datasets, the ones that you and I contribute to, what it might actually be dreaming. And it was really good fun because you can see in that picture just on the bottom left, myself and Tom August, who were the two leads of the Decide project, along with Bryony Benj Abbott, who was one of the artists involved. And we took one of these beautifully painted cocoon caskets and we actually took it into the supercomputer facility where we had done all of the analysis. Obviously, we'd done it remotely and were able to tap into the computers sat in these server rooms. So it's really good fun. So if you're up for something a little bit more esoteric, something a bit more dreamy, something which might take you to a slightly different place, I will now show you this 6-minute video, and then that will be the end of my talk. So I'll stop sharing just this moment. I'll then click on the YouTube link. Oh, hang on. I've got that teed up already. Right, let's find the right thing. I will reshare and I will let you, hopefully you'll be able to hear it okay, and I'll let you enjoy.
I am a data set. Maybe I am more than a data set. I am a data set dreaming.
It's fascinating to try and imagine yourself as a piece of nature. The poem is from the point of view of the data set. Now we're not only imagining ourselves as nature, but now we're imagining ourselves as a correlation of data. That in combination with the act of walking around and experiencing nature, but combining that with the exploration of trying to find these sculptures as they are hidden around the woods, it kind of comes together to make something that I found very powerful.
It's kind of spooky and amazing to be in the forest in the dark and not quite know where you're going, not quite know what you're going to find, and then to have the beautiful words that kind of washed over me as I was exploring was kind of emotional, and it felt to be amazing to be one at nature. Yeah, it's beautiful, magical.
Dataset Stream is a completely new experience for me. I've been involved in datasets for 20 years or more, and I've never really imagined looking at the world from the dataset's point of view. And this whole project really made me look at my data and the data that I work with in a completely different way.
There is something. It is like to be a tree. A dream of growing in slow cradle time, from where I watch the wars of brambles and the hot, quick-gone explosions of bluebells and snowdrops.
I'm Bryony Benjabbit. I'm the visual artist in the Dataset Stream project. And I created the little glass caskets that are dotted around the woodland. The Dataset Stream is an invitation to step into an immersive and imaginary space in which we start to contemplate really what worlds are we conjuring and developing, where are we moving towards by the counting of and recording of the decline of nature, really, and specifically butterflies and moths in this instance. And then what happens when we turn that into fact and pin it down to date and time and location and upload it into a huge data set? What is lost about our relationship to nature in that act of turning it into data?
Diminishing is everywhere. Like diminishing is a pulsing chrysalis of dark matter, growing bigger every season. Maybe the world is addicted to absences? Are scientists managing?
I'm Dr. Michael Pocock. I'm an ecologist working at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. There's this wonderful long history of natural history recording in Britain, and for the Decide project we used a data set which collected or gathered together 18 million observations of butterflies and moths from 117,000 recorders over the past 20 years. If this data set really could dream, then what would it be dreaming? What would it be wanting to tell me?
Did you think data and algorithms are free from influence? The world is a tangle. It is a briar bush of the measurable, the data, and its poetic weight.
What I find fascinating about poetry is that it is about somebody bringing themselves to a work. So there are spaces within that work, and the work doesn't, the poem or the piece of writing doesn't give you everything. Therefore, you have to move towards it, and you have to apply your own imagination and your own experience and your life, and by doing that, you then kind of complete the circuit and bring it to life. I wonder if there are kind of parallels in also data sets. How obviously a data set isn't a complete piece because it doesn't tell a full story. That level of interpretation requires the imagination.
Someone says, life is losing.
You know, we're out there, we're recording all these things, but they're declining, and the act of recording is not changing anything. However, you then see how people get so engaged with the nature that they record that by knowing that by studying, that by observing, people become connected, much more connected to the nature that's around them.
So there you are, from just coming to the end, from poems. Oh, sorry, from science to poems, and from facts to beauty. Hopefully, this hopefully this talk has inspired and informed you, and encouraged you about the difference that you can make with your recording as well, your recording of wildlife. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much.